So we're really lucky. We have put together, I think, one of the best panels that we have ever had here on these issues at the Atlantic Council. We're going to begin with Peter Gleick, who is a world-renowned expert, innovator, and communicator on water and climate issues. He co-founded the Pacific Institute in 1987 and was its president until 2016. He's now president emeritus, and he developed one of the first analyses of climate change impacts on water resources and some of the earliest comprehensive work on water and conflict. And I just found out that his institute and our program are both beneficiaries of the Plowshares Fund. So thank you, Plowshares, for your far-sighted leadership. Next, we're going to have Caitlin Werrell, who is Chief Executive Officer of the Council on Strategic Risks and co-founder of the Center for Climate and Security. She's published extensively on the security implications of climate change, water stress, and natural resource mismanagement in Syria and North Africa. And she's looked in depth at the connections between climate change and the uprisings of the Arab Spring. She's also examined the potential for new technologies to address climate risks, and she's a lead author of something called Responsibility to Prepare. This is a framework that I look forward to hearing more about. And finally, in his first public appearance here in Washington, D.C., we have Kaveh Madani. Kaveh is an environmental scientist, educator, and activist. Until a year ago, he was Deputy Vice President of Iran in his capacity as Deputy Head of Iran's Department of the Environment. And he did many innovative things to try to engage the Iranian population to appreciate the seriousness of the environmental challenges that the country faces. He's also been Vice President of the UN Environment Assembly Bureau, Chief of Iran's Department of Environment's International Affairs and Convention Center. He's led Iranian delegations to a variety of major international meetings and negotiations, and he's currently at Yale, and he's also a visiting professor at Imperial College London.
Thank you. So I would say I second everything I heard, but I insist on the fact that the major reason for the problems we are seeing and the unprecedented problems that we cannot address is their level of complexity. They're too complex to digest and understand, and that is why we all have our correct but incomplete narratives about the problem. So all these factors are there, and then the problem is that we cannot distinguish between drivers, causes, catalysts, triggers, and so on. Right? So this is a major issue. Until a few years ago, I think I thought this is United States West in the 60s and 70s, and then we have so much the growing attention to the environment in the region, and we should be able to solve the problem. There are, of course, causes, as Peter said. I mean, the peak water concept is a very interesting one, and we can say peak environment, peak resources. And I like to complement on the water side. I like to complement that with water bankruptcy. I mean, the whole thing is that our demand and consumption is way more than our available water, which is shrinking, but also on the other hand, the peak water has not reached. We are seeing an increase in water consumption in a country like Iran. And with floods, it's even worse. It's harder to convince people that we don't have enough water. I mean, if you look at social media in the last few days, people are talking about the water crisis ending or water bankruptcy ending, and that, where are the folks, kind of Trump's reaction to snow? Where are the folks who are talking about a drought? Where is the drought? And things like this. So reductionist thinking, we are used to linear thinking, we are used to measurements, as Caitlin showed the one index showing that everything is in order and we are in a safe situation. Everyone is interested, policymakers, experts are interested in measurements, and these problems are too hard to measure. The other thing is in a linear thinking paradigm, we like to connect impact or effect to a cause, whereas everything here is a loop, feedbacks. Everyone is talking about climate change effects on conflict, no one talking about conflict effects on climate change, or conflict effects on security. I recently was in a meeting with the Yemenis and not the right group, but so they can't function because there's a conflict. I mean, there's a conflict. I mean, and when you are in a conflict, why would you care about climate change? That's a secondary concern. You have to have people survive. That's another thing. The countries in the region have a certain economic model. The social economy, political economy of the region is something that we miss in a lot of studies when we talk about the problems in the region. If you look at, Iran is getting a lot of attention because it's a politicized, so the topic of Iran is politicized, and environmental topic is politicized, and I'm going to talk about that. But if you look at the rest of the region, they're not that different. Syria, since the 60s, bad management, bad practices, bad policies, and eventually you have triggers, drought, extreme events which lead to something. If you get lucky, then you get a flood and things you get some extra time, buying extra time. That's how I think the Middle Easterns are managing the environment. So it's, just betting on what might happen next and gambling on the nature and see what, so buying time. But the reality over there, in my opinion, and that's something I was trying to bring up to the, to also get attention to in the administration, that Iran and the rest of the region are using their natural resources, including water, to provide jobs to the weakest economic sector. The weakest economic sector, the people who are in that category are normally government supporters. So it's very important to keep them happy. They are the ones who vote. They're the ones who have been traditionally supporters of the governments, and they're easy to manipulate, they're easy to buy with subsidies and so on. If you have sanctions, if you have conflicts, if you have war with the world, then you become more natural resource dependent. So you use more oil, you use more water, you want to become, so you have to, because your economy, you cannot diversify your economy, you cannot get industrialized, you cannot move the pressure to another sector. You have 20, 30% of the population having a job in one sector, and if they lose their job, they would migrate. What is scarier to governments, water shortage or unemployment? To any government in the world, I think unemployment is way more scarier, way scarier than environmental shortages, environmental problems. Environmental problems, the other thing about environmental issues is that rewards would not be immediate. Indeed, if you do a good thing for the environment, you get penalized by the voters in the short run. Even in dictatorships, rulers pay attention to an extent to what the public thinks. But then the issue is that the public is so distracted, there are so many problems to deal with, that environment becomes a secondary thing. Now, the other thing is this issue of being unhappy with governments, being mad at governments, and then building these wrong narratives, building these incomplete narratives. So if you look at the Iran case, for example, you have one side of one gang which is talking about every problem is being made, even on purpose sometimes, by the government, so including all environmental problems. And then if you look at the other side, it's, oh, these are made by our enemies. They steal our clouds. They manipulate our weather. And climate change is a gift. Who did climate change? The Westerners. We are suffering. And we cannot solve the problem. It's there. And it's something, it's given. We have to deal with it. So the complexity causes this sort of issue, uncertainty, of course, and so we don't know how to deal with it, where to start, and then if you want the solutions you mentioned. If you want to reduce consumption, should you go after lifting the subsidies, raising the prices? All of these things would be costly politically. Now, extreme events reduce the political cost of some reforms, and we have seen a lot of things happening, but then it's a complex issue, and these countries need to diversify the economy. Now, if you look at Iran, then you can say, so there are things like, you want to become food self-sufficient for a good reason. Food security is a big concern for all rulers in that part of the world for good reasons. Now, I don't want to argue why are you fighting with the whole world, right? But they know they have energy sources that was never a concern for them. But food has been a concern for them, and you can see, we have the history of what happened to Saddam Hussein. We saw recently what happened to Qatar. So this concern is a valid concern. Now, how you address it is something which is questionable. If you look at the big leaders of the region, and the powerful ones, Saudi Arabia, Libya, Iranis, they had, even Syrians, they wanted to become food self-sufficient. Saudi Arabia became a wheat exporter at some point in their history. This is crazy. This is insane. Why? Because this is the only thing you don't have. And then, you want to show and say that the sky's the limit. I can buy anything. This mentality has been here in the United States some years ago. Still, we have people in Washington who think this way. But you've learned by making mistakes, and then your economy, the resilience of your economy has helped you shift problems to other sectors. Look what happened to the economy of California when they experienced a serious drought, and then go and see what happens to the economies of the Middle East when there is a big event, because the economy is very water dependent. So peak water, how do you address that? How do you pass that? You need to decouple your economy from water. This is what Israel, to an extent, did successfully. Can you do that in the current situation, current political climate? No. Would you care about environment as your first thing? No, because you have political issues, you have sanctions issues, you have all these other problems, oil prices, and so on. Now, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Libya, Syria, these, Iraq, they have their own, they're in one league. And then, but you look at the new countries, or, so more, I think, recently developed countries. So, Emirates, United Arab Emirates, they weren't under sanctions. They had access to the best consultants in the world, and they had a lot of money. But yet they managed to develop all the problems of the metropolitans, for example, right? So they didn't want to learn from the mistakes, and those who wanted to make money in the region didn't care about those problems. So you create cities which have air pollution, water, insecurity issues, a lot of environmental damages, desalination, all the brine going into the Persian Gulf, and so all these problems are there. Despite the fact that this country is not under sanctions, they have a good international relationship and so on. And the same in other regions. So Iran is ahead of the curve in terms of problem production. And a lot of attention is being given to Iran problems. But the rest of the region are not any better, and some are indeed much worse. In Iran, because of the Lake Rumia tragedy, I think, we had a turning point in our modern history, environmental history. Public awareness, increased, but not necessarily in a helpful way. People talk about water problems. Everyone talks about water problems, but they talk about water problems and water shortage while they're washing the street with tap water. This means that you talk about this problem as another problem which was created by the government. This narrative is right, but it's incomplete, right? And then you blame everything on a certain group, on one president, on the left or right. And then the situation gets politicized. Brian Hook's recent New Year message to Iran about the environment is has a lot of misleading messages. Why was this message sent from Washington? Is this a helpful?
What was the misleading message?
There are examples of, so say, for example, this example of the Iranian regime has built 600 dams after the revolution, while Iran had only like, I don't know, 13 dams or 15 dams before the revolution. How's this a helpful message? What the case he's trying to make is that, you know, SEPA and IRGC wanted to take advantage of this, and all of this was done because of corruption, and you know, they damaged the country, and they know that this is damaging. But a lot of these dams had been planned before the revolution. Their location and a lot of Iran's engineering projects, their locations, their designs had been, you know, predetermined, if you will. But now the argument that, say, the government likes to make in every anniversary of the Islamic Republic is that we have built so many dams, we have built so many roads, we have built so many houses, this many villages have electricity right now. The question to ask is, who says that those things would have not existed if there was no revolution? Now, you can ask the opposite question also. Who says that there wouldn't have been dams if there was no revolution? So these are misleading things. You try to politicize a problem, and then there are consequences. So we know that President Trump is denying climate change. He's leaving the Paris Agreement, and his head of EPA is a controversial figure. Yet he's so obsessed with Iran's environmental problems. Why? Why? Pompeo talks about it. So this, they might think that they're helping, but what they're doing indeed is getting people like myself and a lot of other activists or environmental NGOs and so on, journalists and citizens into trouble. I'm not justifying the way Iran is reacting. Don't get me wrong. I mean, Iran, like the other countries in the region, get paranoid when they see there are political statements. So I was in interrogations. In interrogations, one of the questions I get is the countries which impose sanctions on our food and medicine are now so interested in our water and environment. Why? How can I justify that? I have no say in D.C. I'm not controlling the statements in D.C.
Theoretically, we do not sanction food and medicine
theoretically,
to Iran.
Yes.
Theoretically.
But then this is also a narrative that is being sold to the public over there. And then the statements which are coming out of D.C. are not working in the right way, in a constructive way, because you're just putting people against the government. And that space.
Let me stop you for a second. I mean, we all know in terms of our current policy toward Iran that there are many issues that this administration is emphasizing with regard to Iran that it's not mentioning with regard to any other countries in the world. So, I mean, this double standard is something we're quite used to. But I want to go back to the whole panel, and obviously these are very complex issues, but some facts, as Caitlin has pointed out, I mean, we know what the trend lines are in terms of things like temperature. We are busting through even the temperature increases that were predicted before. And I just want to ask each of the panelists to give a sense of what these rising temperatures are going to mean. I was at an event with Caitlin earlier in the week, and I mean, asked about American military bases in the Middle East. How will you fly planes out of Qatar, out of Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, when it is 125 degrees, 130 degrees? I remember being in Basra 30 years ago in August. I don't think I've ever been so hot in my entire life. And now it is almost hot. It was almost hot enough in Basra last year to actually fry an egg on the pavement. I am told it was almost 130 degrees in Basra last summer. So just the impact of these extraordinary high temperatures on infrastructure, on social stability. I mean, what will people do when it gets that hot?
I think you mentioned our discussion on Monday, but also, as you mentioned, the president and the EPA have said one thing about climate change, but one of the things we've also seen in the U.S. is that the former Secretary of Defense has said climate change is a national security threat, and it requires a whole of government response. And I think that's incredibly important. It's not just something for the military to respond to, but it's something to do in coordination with our diplomacy and diplomatic arms as well. But it's something. Why does the U.S. military care about climate change and risks? It cares, as you mentioned, because of the impacts it will have to the military mission in terms of its infrastructure, its bases, it's not being able to train. And that's true for the US military. It's true for everybody around the world. It's also true for, frankly, our humanitarian assistance and disaster response capabilities. The other reason is because climate change is a threat multiplier. The fact is it's changed, as the military calls it, the operating environment. It's also the peacekeeping environment. It's just we're seeing that climate change as we have increases in water stress, increases in food scarcity, and the inability or unwillingness of governments to prepare for this, and an inability to absorb these stresses that frankly increase state fragility. And so I think one of the points that was made was, how do you address it is important. That's incredibly important. And what I would say is, one of the ways we need to address it is we need to climate-proof our security and peace policies. We need to prepare for the facts on the ground, the fact that it's changing. And we need to be able to do it in a way that addresses the complexity. It's not linear. It's frankly, it's into the very core of our lives because it's through water and food and energy. So we need to get ready for this new reality.
I was thinking also in terms of refugee flows. You talked about displacement. This has certainly been a factor. I know in Iran where so many, where the protests that began in December of 2017, a lot of them were in small provincial cities where farmers had come because they didn't have the water to cultivate land.
Yeah. But then I have to comment on
Can I make 3 quick comments
Sure.
related to this and Kaveh's comments? First of all, without a doubt, the food question is a critical one. 80% of the water that's used worldwide goes to agriculture. In the Middle East and California, it's 80% of the water that humans use goes to agriculture. And it's critical for growing food for us. And that's intertwined, as Kaveh said, with the politics of food dynamics in international markets. If we can't address, and jobs, rural communities have to have and have long depended on agriculture. So that's a critical piece of the puzzle, one piece of the puzzle. And the history of food embargoes and sanctions has not helped any of that. The perception that the 20 countries in the Middle East that we know don't have enough water internally to grow enough food for themselves, and yet are vulnerable often for different reasons to political pressure on food trade internationally, has got to be addressed. Part of that is, how do we best spend the water we have to support our rural communities, to grow the food we need, and yet how can we also remove the politics at the international level that make countries look internally and say, look, I've got to grow enough food for my own population, even if I don't have the water or have to unsustainably use it. So that's one point. The second point Kaveh kept talking about, which I agree completely, is how complex, and I talked about this and Caitlin talked about this, how complex all of these issues are, all the intertwined factor, and it's extraordinarily difficult to know how to deal with such a multi-complex issue. But academics love to argue this is the main cause, or that's the main cause, or whatever, and I'm an academic too. So setting that aside, we may never be able to answer this conflict was caused X% by politics and Y% by hydrology and climate change and Z% by demographics. Academics will continue to argue about that, and I don't think that's the issue. I would like to argue that independent of our ability to answer that question, what percentage some conflict is caused by, we can move toward more sustainable water management, and that will help reduce the risk of conflict over water, and I tried to make that point in my talk. And the third quick observation is the president, our president's EPA head last week acknowledged sort of that climate change was an issue and made the statement, water is much more important than climate change. Now look, I'm a hydrologist and a climatologist by training. I was delighted to hear our EPA head say we really need to address the water issues, and I hope that they move in that direction. But I'd like to make the simple point that we can do more than one thing at a time. It's not, let's ignore the climate problem because water's important, more important, whether or not that's true. It's that we have to deal with our water problems and we have to deal with our climate problems. It's not either or, and the idea that this is a single, any of these issues are a single problem, I think you're getting the message from all of us that none of us believe that, And we can do more than one thing at once, and we have to do more than one thing at once.
Kaveh, can I ask about water management in Iran?
Can I?
Yes, go ahead if you
so-
want to
so-
respond to that.
Yeah. So just again, a great point. Again, policymakers, a lot of economists are used to prioritizing things. They're used to this question of if there is one thing that you want to solve, what
Right.
or invest in, what
it's
is
only
that?
markets. It's
right?
only technology. It's only something.
And then even the public likes to ask that question. And then you get into this game of water is important. I remember I started working on waste, and this was part of the education program in a certain season during 3 months. A lot of people in the opposition were attacking me saying, oh, Kaveh Madani has lobbied with Iran's IRGC to distract people from water as the main problem of Iran, and get them busy with waste. Waste is a serious issue in the Middle East. No one talks about it. Biodiversity loss is a serious issue in the Middle East, but people like to talk about water. Politics of water is great, transboundary issues, power hegemony, and all that. So water is something which gets attention. Now, the false information getting out of media. December 2017, Iran's demonstrations being tied to water by an article in the New York Times. The lady who wrote that article contacted me to interview me. And then we did a few back and forth, and I felt like she doesn't want to read any of the stuff which is out there. I kept sending resources, and from the questions I could tell that. So I didn't respond to any question. The article comes out, I get cited, but with the wrong title, so she didn't even know I was not a professor anymore. Even my boss, the vice president, was also quoted, with the wrong title. And then December 2017 is a wet season. People don't go out on demonstrations for water.
Okay.
Right? But this has been established. Now, consequence. Here there are questions from me. The security community gets so interested on the impact of water on the uprising and opposition. Back home, I get interrogation questions. Would there be a water war? Would there be a water war? And I see it. I'm being seen as an agent of so ethics. And this whole issue of using any opportunity to link things with each other and create a catchy title and it's funny narrative is bad, and then it creates problems. Complex problems need portfolio solutions, a set of solutions. There are multiple. So you're dealing with a sick body which has problems in its heart, brain, kidneys, everything. You cannot say let me work on this. And a lot of problems in the water sector are byproducts of problems in other sectors. And that's something we don't get, and a lot of times it's not within our authority. No one, so people in charge of water and environment in Iran don't decide about food policies, don't decide about development policies, don't decide about population growth policies, don't decide about political relationships of the country, international relations, nuclear plan, and so on. So a lot of problems are byproducts which happen in this area. So this is important.
Forgive me, but I am going to ask you a water question. And that is, we were talking earlier about the paving over of natural floodplains. This is something we've seen repeatedly in our country. We saw it in Houston. We've seen it in the upper Midwest where we've had terrible floods. You mentioned Dubai, United Arab Emirates, where God knows anything that could be built on has been built on, and more. In Iran in particular, the growth of the population in cities like Tehran has led to this. And if you could just address that, and then also the type of agriculture that's practiced. David Leyland, in his paper, he referenced this, that there is still flood, irrigation in places, which seems insane. So just a brief word on that, and then we're going to open to the audience.
Flood irrigation is good for recharge, and unfortunately, the government is after irrigation efficiency increase without having any plan for controlling extra use, and that's another paradox. So we will see increase in water use in Iran. Now, the issue of food security is an argument. I mean, not that this is the eventual, the consequence for sure, but from the plans on the ground, this would be one of the problems. So no one is planning to cut on water use, and this is not a priority for the government and those who decide about. So Minister of Agriculture is the one which is increasing in irrigation efficiency, increasing in Iran. One thing, and flood irrigation, so flood irrigation causes a lot of evaporation. But that's one thing. But on the issue of food security is, as I said, is a cover. It's something that, like, people don't talk about job creation, right? And if you look at the production in the Middle East, what they produce with their water, so you get crazy. Iran produces a lot of summer crops and exports a lot of cheap summer crops to other countries. It works for the farmers. It's market cash income, but it doesn't help the country strategically because it's not cereal production, right? So that this is also an important thing to consider. Now back to the population game. If you look at the region, urbanization is a major issue. Population increase has been a major issue. Still, the government of Iran is very interested in population increase because they think that we don't have a backup population for backup generation for this, my generation. So 30%, the urban population was 30% in 1979. Now it's 70%. Not that cities are bad, but the problem in that part of the world is everyone goes to just a few major cities. So you have these huge metropolitans, but you don't have small cities, you don't have middle-sized cities. And these big cities, extract all the resources, then they get, everything. Now, this mentality of this perception of development in the region, which is, the governments in the developing world still get proud with concrete and steel. That's what you can take photographs with. China, Iran, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, and all that. So these countries are celebrating this sort of structural development. And in structural development, what you do is you destroy the nature to build good things that people like, buildings, skyscrapers, towers, and dams, and so on. In the short run, construction is another thing which creates a lot of jobs and happiness. Right. Construction creates a lot of opportunities. So yes, there are a lot of populists who build these dams just to make people happy and get reelected. That's corruption, and that's not right. But then, understand the economic dimensions of it. Now, in case of the flood, it's too early to judge, but so far the analysis that we have been looking at, in a lot of places, the issue is that in downstream you have developed things. There was an upstream action, dam building, and so on. People lose their, the memory of this was a floodplain. This was a valley where water was passing through, and then there is not even a big flood, and then people get surprised. Now, the best thing is to say it's climate change. This is the new reality. This is the new normal. And then what's the conclusion? Climate change. What is the conclusion? Believe it or not, today, the president said it yesterday. The deputy minister of water and energy, said it. We're going to build more dams. These dams prevented more damages. No one talks about the dynamics of development below a dam. No one talks about the safe development paradox, a well-known argument. So these are the things. So the social dimension is really huge. The political dimension is huge, and everyone just tries to take advantage of the opportunity to promote their agenda, and this is crazy.
Yeah, Caitlin, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to tie together a lot of what we're hearing. Frankly, the question that you brought up too as well between ranking and such, we get that question all the time. How does climate change compare to other national security risks? And what I would say is, frankly, we need to be asking better questions. Not how does climate change rank, what does climate change mean for the geopolitical situation in the Arctic and U.S. relations with Russia and China? What does climate change mean for a drought situation and food security in North Korea? Could that scale up into another situation? What does climate change mean for fish stocks in the South China Sea as they move northward, and for our relationship in the South China Sea? So the other reason it's incredibly important that we ask good questions is because our questions drive our policy. As we saw in Syria, we weren't asking if a drought or millions of people internally displaced meant anything for state fragility. So maybe we missed it. There were a lot of other factors for why we missed it, but if we're not asking these policies, then we're frankly unprepared. The other thing is this point about people using climate change as an excuse. That's also not new. We've seen that. Al-Bashir has used that example in the past. Mugabe has used that example in the past. When people are in a tough position and they have a lot of pressure on them, there's a lot of blame that you want to place on anybody but you.
Sure.
But that doesn't change the facts on the ground. It also doesn't change that this is something that we're going to continue to see. Climate changes are locked in. There's going to always be an excuse for an authoritarian response. And that's why I would also bring it back to the responsibility to prepare. We can see a lot of these risks coming. We can't necessarily tell what the politics are going to be. We know the seas are rising. We know droughts and floods are going to become more frequent. We know there might be health. We know that people are going to have to move out of harm's way, potentially at vast scales.
Yeah.
And so we need to use this time and the information that we have now to put in place policies that are humanitarian. Because if we don't act, we're going to get caught flat-footed, and you're going to open up the opportunity for more authoritarian responses. And so I would say, again, it all comes back to let's ask better questions so we get better policy, so we prepare.
Yeah. It entirely helps if you actually pay attention to facts, too, and don't try to relitigate them. You wanted to say, Peter?
A quick comment. I don't think it's inappropriate that the government of Iran today talk about the role of climate change. I think Kaveh's point is that if you talk about climate change as the only factor that's causing your current crises, you're missing the point. You're missing an opportunity to understand the role that it's playing, but more importantly, you're missing the opportunity to do things differently, to change the way you do downstream flood management, to change the way you think about big dams versus alternative sources of water or demand management for water. That's the issue. It's not don't talk about climate change. It's that don't talk only about climate change, or don't only talk about existing infrastructure or economics. And again, we've made that point, I think, several
Or if you
times.
talk about it, taking action on it, right?
Yeah.
Well, yes, and there's a Russian
let's
statement,
hold it there,
Boshadil mentions love, more action, less talk.
We have 20
could use
minutes
more of
left,
that.
and we have an eager audience full of experts. This gentleman here has had his hand up for a while, so let's start with him. Say your name and ask a question.
Press. What are the prospects for international collaboration, even between enemies, on environmental issues in the Middle East?
Thank you so much for that question. Let me say that before the United States withdrew from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the nuclear deal, before Trump, we had a robust program of exchanges, academic exchanges, with Iran that included issues of water management, water use, among others, public health, seismology, and so what are the prospects now, I guess? I mean, for this kind of collaboration, between the United States and Iran, between the United States and any of the other countries in MENA?
So 2 points about that. First of all, there are many, as I hinted a little bit in my talk, international agreements about sharing water. India and Pakistan signed an agreement on the Indus in 1960 that governs to some degree their ongoing dispute about allocations. And that treaty has held. Both sides have met their commitments so far. They don't always work, but that's one possibility, to negotiate international treaties over shared water resources. And there are many opportunities for that. The other point is one that Barbara just made. I was involved many years ago with the Pugwash organization, which won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1996, I think it was, for their work to bring scientists from the Soviet Union and the United States together throughout the Cold War to talk about arms control agreements, to talk about scientific cooperation. It was a science-to-science exchange. And I've been involved in exchanges between the US National Academy of Sciences and the Iranian National Academy of Sciences over water issues, bringing hydrologists from both sides to both countries to talk about water management, water policy at the international level, at the subnational level. And those agreements and those exchanges are incredibly positive for relationships. Now, in today's climate, between the two countries, that's a challenge. But those kinds of opportunities, I think, are really important.
Kaveh, I don't know if you want to add. I mean, we have a horrible experience. Obviously, there are environmentalists who are in prison in Iran right now for their contacts with outsiders. So is it feasible to even talk about this in the current climate?
I think we are the ones who make it feasible. It's the thing is that the intelligence community, security community wants to control everything. And if you back up and let them do that, they do that. They take over the environmental space because they have realized well, I mean, people, the Intel community in Iran, Intel community outside Iran have realized well, and in the region, that environment has the power to unite people regardless of their ideologies, ethnicities, and so on. Everyone was unhappy with the lake which dried up in Iran. We got international attention to it. Everyone is unhappy with Zayan Darude dying. So it doesn't matter if you support the government or not. So this power is what has made the environmental space vulnerable to politicization and securitization. So one, opposition of Iran inside Iran, opposition of the government inside Iran, opposition of the government outside Iran, opposition of regime, the enemies, and so on. Everyone understands this potential. So the environmental space has been politicized. Then it creates paranoia. The other party has reacted by securitizing this environment. They think every NGO which is in touch with the outsiders has a plan, has an agenda. Kaveh Madani is too Western to be loyal to the country. So if he's talking about the environment, someone is paying his money somewhere else. So I don't think, so it depends also on the enemy. What sort of enemy are we talking about, right? There are some regional, forced regional cooperations. But normally those are, environment is not the only subject. I think that's one thing that we need to pay attention to. You don't go and sign a treaty on water with your neighbor unless there is some sort of give and take, there is some sort of trade, right? Because if you're downstream and the upstream country wants to give you more water, then it's a zero-sum game, right? So who would do that? But in case of Iran and Afghanistan, for example, they're not enemies, right? But we have certain groups talking about things. Water is one of the topics. For example, I think six negotiating groups, and water is one group. So then if there is a bundle, then there are things. Nuclear agreement of Iran. When Iran was only insisting on the number of centrifuges, nothing was achieved. When they learned how to trade, buy Boeings and Airbuses for reduction in the number of centrifuges, both sides learned that this is a trade. So environment, unfortunately, is still part of the big package.
Yeah. David, you wanted to say something? Yeah. Wait for the microphone here. Yeah. I should say also that Fatima Aman, who's with us, wrote an excellent piece on the Iran-Afghanistan water disputes a couple of years ago. So
where there's another agreement.
Yeah, where there's another agreement, which I believe your father helped negotiate.
Yes,
Anyway, please.
I'm David Leyland. My experience is as an observer, but it's long-term in Iran. My father was involved in negotiations of the India-Pakistan treaty and also between Iran and Afghanistan. Incidentally, those treaties were made possible because the World Bank, in effect, bribed the other party.
Interesting.
With Iran, Afghanistan, the Afghans would never have agreed if they hadn't gotten from AID the Kajaki down.
Interesting.
It was a privilege to listen to you all today, and I'm really privileged. And the other day I was at the Wilson Center and listening to a lot of top government officials talking about initiatives that the United States is making with respect to the world challenge. Will Rogers said, everybody's talking about the weather, but nobody's doing anything about it. And my background's been on the ground. And I'm wondering, there are things, and Kaveh and I have talked about this, that the governments can do, not just in Iran, but throughout the Middle East, extension services to help farmers improve the slight ways of irrigation practices, crop selections. The United Nations agencies, FAO, UNDP, they've had pilot projects, Minaret, sort of, with joint ventures with the Department of the Environment in Iran, which have been very helpful as pilot. Unfortunately, the World Bank is not allowed to work in Iran because the United States has decided that. But what can be done to, what is being done to have governments encouraged to train, maybe using clerics to help local people to make small changes? It's a start.
Let me add to that, what is the UN doing? Because as David mentioned, US cannot allow the World Bank to make loans to Iran for environmental purposes because of our sanctions and because of congressional legislation. But UN, UNDP, I remember a very active gentleman, Gary Lewis, who I met in Tehran, who was working on these issues. So if you could, what can we do in terms of these pilot projects and grassroots initiatives?
I would say one thing that's incredibly important, that speaks also to your question about like peace and collaboration, is data diplomacy. Information is incredibly important now. And as we've seen, we have these capabilities now to predict and analyze and prepare for these things. We are able to monitor groundwater levels from satellites in space. And it also, I think, helps with governance. When you have facts, it helps sometimes. But those kind of things can help. And being able to localize that data is incredibly important.
So,
and the UNDP is starting to do that as well. They have a program where it's based on, frankly, providing data to local communities.
let me add to that. I hate to be the optimist here, but in general, not quickly enough. I think we're moving in the right direction in water sustainability broadly. We're learning more about smart irrigation and smart urban water use. Kaveh's point that if you improve irrigation efficiency, but then simply use that same water to grow more food in an arid region, you may not be helping the problem. But we can grow more food with less water, and then think about restoring groundwater and protecting ecosystems or supporting urban communities. That's a policy question. There are all sorts of really innovative things going on in the water world, around the world, in terms of irrigation efficiency and growing more food with less water, urban efficiency, storm water capture and management when we get bad floods, wastewater treatment and reuse. Singapore collects and treats and reuses their wastewater now. Israel does too. California is moving in that direction because wastewater used to be a liability, but now everybody's realizing it's an asset. We ought to put it to use. There are a lot of innovative things going on. Getting the right community to teach the right lesson is one of the things we've learned. We learned a long time ago that smart thinking, well-meaning non-governmental organizations that go into Africa and drill a well for a community and then leave, and then the groundwater well breaks and the technology to fix it is in Germany somewhere, that doesn't help. But when the communities are involved, if it's the clerics in Iran or elsewhere in the Middle East or local women's groups, we've learned that the communities designing and developing the water systems that they need is a smarter way to go about it. And also, there are lots of new innovative financing tools, and this gets to the UN question. There's what we now call green financing. There are a lot of really innovative financing tools to help us come up with the money to make the investments in the infrastructure we need, that maybe move away from the traditional dam construction that the World Bank used to do towards smaller scale projects. So I don't think we're moving fast enough, but I see lots of success stories out there that could be lessons spread from one region to another.
I think it's a very smart point and something that we have discounted. So this narrative which has been built that the governments of the region are the only cause of the problem, and you remove the governments or change the presidents, and the problem would be solved, or like, the Middle East would be Switzerland overnight. The social, institutions around resources, natural resources in the region have been very important, and they have been destroyed by migration, by all these like development and anything, structural development, lack of resources, and so on. Rebuilding those matters. Post-conflict, during conflict, what happens to them? This is something very important. We are all interested, most people are interested, I think, naturally, in macro solution. Micro solutions are hard to implement. Their time, it takes a lot of time. But bottom-up approaches are very, very important. And this is something that we are missing. Can we contribute from here to there? Yes. The data issue that Caitlin mentioned is extremely important, and from personal experience. What we did with a lot of other researchers abroad with no connection to the government of Iran had a lot of impact on the narratives that they were selling, right? So now, like, someone tweets and say the area of the Lake Rumia has increased by 40%. So within 24 hours, you can check the satellite data and see if they're right or wrong, right? One other thing is predicting and projection is one thing. Looking at the past is another important thing. Again, we are very interested in the future, not much in the past. And we need data for the past. The problem of data and building a correct narrative about the problem in the Middle East is very important. And what happens here, if directed in the right way, all the resources and efforts can lead to a lot of things. I don't see a prospect of successful UN intervention or collaboration with Iran on environmental problems. I don't see that at the moment because of the political climate. But yeah, I mean, some stuff can be done. You need some examples. But green investments in the environment, because the inefficiency is super high in that region. Like energy saving is easy to be done in Iran and pays you back. There are a lot of schemes that you can make money off of. So these opportunities are there and can be taken advantage of also, like for making money. People like to make money. So go and make money of increasing efficiency, and then green funds and new businesses, greenhouses. In that part of the world, I mean, you can produce a lot with solar plants and export and make a lot of money. So there are a lot of opportunities.
Okay. We're getting close to the end, so let me take maybe the final questions from this gentleman and then from Faye, and is that it? Yeah, okay, so we'll do those two. Yeah. Start over here. Wait for the microphone. Coming to you, yes? Yeah, we'll do them all at once, and then we can have our final thoughts there.
Hi, Michael Greco. I'm an intern at the Center for National Interest. So clearly, governments and states that are embroiled in civil war or are a failed state would not be focusing on climate change as a primary issue. But have there been efforts or any sort of trials of removing water scarcity as a driver of conflict? I think you called it a conflict trigger, so that it doesn't exacerbate the conflict.
Okay, that's one. And then if you want to hand the microphone over to Faye here in the front. Okay. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Madani. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'm Faye Moqtadir. I'm a member of Atlantic Council. Thank you, Barbara. I saw on a Persian BBC a documentary on a group of women NGOs who were environmentalist activists, and they were run by an elderly woman, Mahlaqa. I remember, yeah. They were pretty instrumental, and I was very, very proud to see the women at the forefront of this environmental crisis issue. Did you get a chance in your stay in Iran to talk to them? Because they do get occasionally invited into, President Rouhani's gatherings, and they're pretty influential. How effective are these NGOs over there? Thank you.
We'll start with Kaveh. We were talking, there's something like 850 environmental NGOs in Iran.
So that was the number back then.
Yeah.
I was responsible to deal with the NGOs. 850 registered environmental NGOs in Iran. There are a lot of groups which are not registered, and also including some of the people you're referring to, a lot of active groups. They are pretty active on the ground. They are doing a lot. They need more training. They need, good projects, good ideas to implement, but they are very active. Women are very active in the environmental space. So there are, as I said, a lot of good things, but politicization of the environment, securitization by the government affects these people. People don't know when they would get into trouble. So yes, there are a lot of good things happening. The reason that you hear so much about Iran's environmental problems, but not the neighbors, neighboring countries, is the fact that Iranians are sensitive to the environment for any reason, right? But and if I've had meetings with people from United Arab Emirates. I keep referring to them, but no offense to anyone. But when you talk to the activists there, it's like golden. We're building an island, environmental friendly island in the Persian Gulf. I mean, come on. So they're not there, right? So we are in a different phase in Iran in terms of activism, but they need a lot of training. And again, that's another area that we can provide from here, a lot of training, a lot of good stuff.
Do it online, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. We'll just go down the line. So Peter, your thoughts on,
Sure.
on the other questions?
So if I understand what you're asking, because there are a lot of different factors that play into conflicts over water, triggers, water is a trigger, water is a weapon, water is a casualty in the way we think about it. There are lots of different approaches to dealing with those challenges. And on the trigger side, when water is scarce and states are weak or governance is poor, you have growing tensions over who controls the water, who has access to water, how much water is allocated to different communities, rural to urban, farmer to farmer. That's where the risk of conflict grows. And so part of the solution would be find more water. That's the traditional approach. Let's find more water. Let's build another dam. Let's drill another groundwater well. And part of my argument is that in an era of peak water where you've tapped all the local water resources, that's less of an option. There are alternative sources of water, like treated wastewater or desalination. Or you think about the demand side. How can I do more with the water that I have? And that either frees up more water and reduces tensions, or it reduces allocation challenges. Or you think about politics and who has the right to use that water? What are the water laws? A lot of the conflicts in our chronology in recent years have been riots between two groups because Group A feels we're not getting the water that Group B is getting, and it ought to be ours or we ought to get more of it. That's an allocation question. That's a political question. It's a water rights question. You have to deal with all of those possibilities depending on the circumstances. But I think that's possible to do, and it's tied up with this broader question of really moving toward a sustainable water system in its entirety.
Caitlin, you get the last word.
Well, I would also point to Jeff Kemp's work at the Center for National Interest. He does a great monograph looking at water insecurity in the Middle East. But I would say, when we look at water and peace and security, it's not just water scarcity. Oftentimes, it's water variability, too much or too little. And I think and then you look at, we're talking about fresh water, but let's not forget the ocean and the fact that the Navy is very much a water-based thing. So I would say, I don't know if we can entirely isolate water from conflict, but what we do need to do is be better at anticipating where we're likely to see water-related triggers. We also need to just, frankly, climate-proof and water-proof our peace agreements so that we're prepared for a range of changes and we're resilient to this.
Kaveh, you had one last point?
Just to make sure that my message about Iran's water situation is clear. What we are seeing in Iran today is the impact of decades of bad management and bad policy decisions, bad designs, a lot of unintended consequences. And they're not limited to the water sector, but we are not at this point seeing a sign, any positive sign of a decision, a major decision to reform this, situation, to make policy recommendations or reforms which would address the water and environmental problems in Iran. There are a lot of new exacerbators and triggers, but the problem we are having is that the issue of bad governance is important and is being overlooked.
Maybe then we can solve our water problems in the U.S.
Exactly.
Well, I don't know about all of you, but I learned an enormous amount from this event, and I'm very, very grateful to all of our speakers. So please thank them and come again. Thank you so much.